I'm so excited for our guest today, and I'm so excited to partner with one of the best drinks in the business. Do you need a quick boost to get you going? Grab a Clean Cause organic sparkling yerba mate and get your day going with 160 milligrams of caffeine that won't cause the crashes or the jitters like coffee and other energy drinks do. Clean Cause is low in calories, it's low in sugar, and it comes in 5 great flavors. But here's the best part. Every sip makes a difference in the fight against addiction. Clean Cause donates 50% of net profits to support individuals in recovery from drug and alcohol addiction. So grab a boost, live better, transform lives. Head on over to cleancause.com and get 20% off your order by using the promo code SOBERGUY. That's cleancause.com. Enter the promo code SOBERGUY at checkout and save 20%.
That Sober Guy podcast contains adult content, merciless truth, and emotional nudity. Listener discretion is advised.
I'm Shane Ramer. You're listening to That Sober Guy podcast, and we help people stay sober. If it's your first time listening, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here today. So it's time to go home. You can find more podcasts, more resources. You can also contact us by going to thatsoberguy.com. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at That Sober Guy Podcast. All the links from the today's show will be in the show notes for you, so they're easy for you to find. Our guest today is Pastor Greg Munck. So excited to have him on the show from Southern California. And Greg is a combat promoted Marine who served his country in the Gulf War. He's the author of the book, The Guide, Survival, Warfighting, Peacemaking. And that was actually just released just on May 9th. And he's currently the lead pastor and co-founder of Crossline Community Church in Laguna Hills, California. And he travels speaking for the Guide Soldier Foundation and SOF Missions, which serves active and veteran military personnel worldwide. He's married to his wife since 1992, and they have 5 children. And man, just really honored and excited to talk to Pastor Greg today. So I just want to welcome you, my friend. Thank you so much for coming on That Sober Guy.
Oh my gosh, man. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for the opportunity, man, to hang out with you and just chat. So.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I think why waste any time? We'll dive right in. I heard a little bit of your testimony, of some of your background on a video that was posted, I think on the Crossline website. And I think you're at Angel Stadium and you're given a little rundown, little piece of your testimony. And one of the things that I related to so much is that, and man, I'm really not wasting any time here, I feel like, but we saw what drugs and alcohol did to our fathers. And at some point, you found yourself, I know I found myself going down that same path. Mm-hmm. And so what made you change directions in that? And then maybe you can give us a little background about yourself in that process as well.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so it's interesting that, I love that question because, early on in dealing with my dad's addictions, we were young, and it started with alcohol, and he started smoking pot, and then pot moved to doing cocaine, then freebasing, and then, heroin addict. And so in that process, it was like from 8 years old till I was about 17, it just got really bad. And just, I'll answer that question first, and then I'll go back and share some things of the craziness. But I just seeing that my dad go through these phases, and then him being, and all the pain that was being caused to our family, I knew right away that I'm not going to do that to my children. I'm not going to do that to my kids. And I had this, I know parents of addicts and have different roads they go down. Some go down the same path because that's what they learn, and others are more like me. But, it was funny because then when I got to high school, I was, alcohol was okay. I was totally anti-drug because of my dad. But, I was going down the same path in the sense that my whole focus was on partying, girls, and football and that whole thing. So I got caught up in that. But, I just had this sense about me though, like, I'm not going to be that. I'm not doing that to my kids. And so it was this, and I remember talking to my mom about it. She's, you can't, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what you're going to. I said, no, I'm never going to be like that piece of, you know what? And so, and being that kid who grew up in stuff, man, it just got crazy. Like the first person I ever really hit so he wouldn't drive drunk or I got in a fight with was my dad. 12 accounts of drunk driving. How is that possible?
Dang.
Like,
yeah, that's a lot.
And so he would always want to drive when he's hammered, like just belligerent. And I remember having fun with him, like I didn't grow up we were in a Christian home, and I remember making fun of him and no, just not making fun of him, but more like playing with him. He's so drunk.
Trying to mess with him. I
would hear him grab his keys and try to go out the front door. So I'd run out the back door and run around the side. I'd be standing at the front door and he'd be like fumbling around. He'd walk out and then I'd be like, "Hey, Dad, what's up?" He's like, "Dang it, you're always there. How do you know?" And like, so hammered. Then he'd try to go out the back door, go around. So I'd go out the front and be at trying to open the gate, trying to get out. And he opens it. And he's just like, you just see this like, darn it. And he just walks back to, it was, I know I'm laughing at it now, but it's just so sad. But, but besides that, so, the first person really hit, and the first time I did cocaine, I was in 7th grade, was my dad. It's like, hey, I'd rather you try it with me than your friends, is what his excuse was for doing that. The first time I had a shotgun put to my head, and that's just it's a crazy statement, is that my dad was running drugs and he stole a Porsche from his drug dealing friend, and he had a guy at the house to protect the family. I didn't know this. I was like 11 years old at the time.
Yeah.
And I get up to go take a leak in the middle of the night, and all of a sudden I startle the guy on the couch. He gets up, cocks the shotgun, pins my head to the thing, light gets turned on, and I piss my pants. And I just go back to my room and shut my door, put my little toy box in front of the door, and just go to sleep. And I try to go to sleep, but I can't. And I wait for the sun to come out and I fall asleep, and I get out, and it's just, my dad, the marshals would come, and I was the youngest of 2 boys. And like there's my next brother's 2 years older than me, and my other's like 6 years older. But we would have cops come to the house, and they're embarrassed, and they would send me to the front door to deal with the marshals. And I was always scared to death. I remember one time my dad was drinking, and the marshals knock on the door, and there's a cop there, and he's like, "Hey," and he comes in like, "Don't tell him I'm here. Don't tell him I'm here." And I'm like, "What are you talking about, Dad?" And so he takes off outside, and then I go open the door, and it's the marshals, and they're like, "Hey, is your dad here?" And I'm like, and I didn't really answer, and he's just like, "Son, is your dad here?" And I'm like, kind of. And I just didn't want to deal with this crap anymore. So I'm like, I nod my head, and then they come in the house, and my dad's trying to go over the back wall. And our back wall it was behind like a 7-Eleven shopping center kind of thing. And there was a cop there waiting for him to go over the wall. So the 2 guys arrest him, and he's walking back, at the front door. I'm just sitting there listening to this. And then he walks by, and he's like, "You piece of shit." Wow. And he says that to me. And I was like, I remember how I'm just like, this is not my problem, man. This is not my problem. This is.
How old were you at this time?
Gosh, that was probably, again, at 10, 11 years old.
So you weren't a teenager yet. You're still just boy,
no.
Man.
It's just like, and just to hear, and then he tried to get me I did that coke one time with him, and I just remember, and then after we did that, he put me in a limo with some girls, and we drove me home, and he's like, "Hey, don't tell your mom, I'll be home later." And it just was like, I cried a lot. I have all this in my book, and it's called The Guide: Survival, Warfighting, Peacemaking, because I was a survivor, warfighter, peacemaker. And in the beginning of that, I talk about these stories, I talk about what happened. And so it was tragic, man. Yeah. And of all the things I have to say that really impacted me, like, it's missing my birthdays. He missed my 11th, 12th, and 13th birthday. And, I don't want to get into it. I think that gets me the most emotional. I don't know why.
Sure.
It's weird. It's just that,
well, I think
that so many promises that were broken, right?
Well, do you think too, like, once you become a father, and you realize like the love that you have for your own kids, and then you just kind of go like, how could he do that? You know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Like, how I just don't, you don't get it, you know?
Well, that's the thing. It's like, that's really part of, I have to get myself up to have compassion for, addicts, and it's hard to explain. Like, this is getting pretty deep, but
we're only like 9 minutes in.
What's that?
We're 9 minutes in. We definitely dove right in, man. I love it. Thank you.
Because I don't want to shame. I'm not trying to shame anybody, but I just think it's like because I do understand that when we get to a point of addiction and there's really no turning back, where it overtakes you, right?
Yeah,
I totally understand that. I've walked through it. I lived it. I know that. But there's that point. I think there's that point where that selfishness before you got to the addiction, that selfishness, your desire to do your own thing, your desire to be your own guy, your desire to do whatever, took you down a path, and it's like a snowball, right? Once you get into it, it's so hard to stop. But there's that point. All I'm trying to say is there's a point when you do have a choice, when you don't have to make that decision. And he was making decisions, that were based on his flesh, and it pulled him into the pit, man. And so anyway, I don't judge people for that. I just, as a person of an addict, just being honest with you, that thought does go through my mind. It's like, well, there's one point where you did choose to do this. You chose this. Yeah. No, I didn't choose it. Yes. No. There's a point. So that's not to sound incompassionate or anything, but I do. But I'm all about helping people get in recovery, and getting sober and directing them and counseling them and guiding them. So anyway.
Yeah, no, I love that, man. Thanks so much for sharing that. I know those are, we definitely that's probably the fastest I think I've dove into a podcast. Like, hey, it just happens. I mean, that's God doing work, I guess. So, so one of the things I wanted to also lead with, man, is just say thank you for your service, for serving our country.
Right.
I love, our veterans, our first responders. And, I know that, our veterans and our first responders are some of the folks who deal with trauma and addiction and alcoholism like no other do. And so, I know that that's some of the work that you do as well. And I'd like to get into that, at some point in the conversation too, but maybe give us a little background on you being a Marine. How did that maybe play into you joining the military after coming up with such a background, dealing with your father?
Yeah, I think, I think we were, we moved from Ohio when I was like 4 years old, and I grew up in Fountain Valley, California. It's right next to Huntington Beach, and it was a great place. And then as I got older, some of those stories I was telling you, it got worse and worse and worse. And then my dad was gone more and more and more. And so it got to the point where he just was gone. And he wasn't coming home. It was a month, 2 months. Is he dead? We don't know. So many times we'd go looking for him, and then, or we get a call from the bar, come pick up your dad. And, my brothers would get me in the car, and I'll give you a Thrifty ice cream if you go get dad, because they're embarrassed. Right. And so, but all I have to say is he just was gone more and more. And then it got to a point where, my family was my friends. My mom had to work full time. We got evicted 4 times, kicked out of the house. I lived at my friends' houses, and those families took care of me, and I was so thankful for them and them giving me some structure in that regard. And my mom did the best she could, to take care of. I grew up on peanut butter sandwiches, top ramen, and Hormel chili. Man, that was my meal. But so he's gone all the time, and I just start realizing my friend joins the Marine Corps, and he's going to go visit his recruiter one day. And so I go with him, and then we're sitting there, and he's like, "Hey, you guys can go in the buddy program." And I remember I asked him, I go, "Is there any conflicts going on?" He's like, "No, there's nothing going on in the world." I just watched Full Metal Jacket, that movie, and then I joined the Marine Corps. It shows you my psyche, right? Yeah. It's like. So I joined. I joined because it was my spring of senior year. I really didn't have any direction, and I thought, hey, 3 meals a day, and I just got to do what I'm told. I can handle that. I played football, and so I was used to Hell Week. I was always like, hey, oh, is it like Full Metal Jacket? For some reason, that was attractive to me. And I understand now there's a lot of guys like me that come from broken homes that really appeals to them. There's a Lieutenant Grossman is a great guy. He wrote a book called On Combat. And, the whole quote, if you've ever heard it, when he talks about that there's wolves, and then there's sheep, and then there's sheepdogs. And so you're either a sheep or you're a psychotic wolf, or then there's the sheepdogs that are they have psychotic tendencies, but they have empathy as well.
Yeah.
And they're your cops, and they're your special forces guys, and they're the guys that are first responders. They're the sheepdogs. And I've always been wired that way for some reason. And I joined because I had nowhere else to go, to be honest with you. And I felt like I needed a new chapter, a new start. How to get out of this craziness. And that was an opportunity for me. And I'm not alone. There's a lot of guys and women like me that grow up in chaos, or, or who raised by wolves, so to speak. And then we're attracted to that. And then there's a lot of Marines and military people that grew up in great homes, and, it's a heritage and that. So it's not just me, but I wanted a new start. And so I joined the Marine Corps, and I loved it. I was in boot camp and I thrived. It was just like Full Metal Jacket, and I dug it. I dug being challenged, and you can't push me farther. I can do anything you throw at me. Anything you give me, I can handle. Because I'd grown up in such a lot. I wasn't afraid of anything. I had this chip on my shoulder too. I wanted to prove something. I wanted to start my new life. So yeah. I really excelled, and I enjoyed it, and so halfway, during, I joined I went to boot camp in March of 1989. And my buddy, we were supposed to go together. He couldn't wait. So he left in the fall. And I played football at Orange Coast College for a semester. And then I went in the Marine Corps in March. And so I go in the Marine Corps. My dad at that time is not around. We don't know. My brother's getting married in June of that year. I'm going to miss his wedding because I'm in boot camp. And then we don't know where my dad is. And my dad winds up missing his first son's wedding. It's just unbelievable. He was gone. We didn't know where he was at the time. I'll come back to that. But I joined the Marine Corps, and I love it. Boot camp, graduated the guide. So I was the guide in Marine Corps boot camp. And so that in that picture there's a picture on the cover. I'm the guide. That's actually me.
Oh, that's awesome.
Little thinner and leaner. But
love that cover. That's a great.
So I'm holding a flag, and if you call it, the platoon flag is called a guidon, and if you carry that, the drill instructors call you guide. They yell at you, guide, where you at, guide? So that's the term. So the guide is where that title comes from. And so I was a guy in boot camp, loved it, totally excelled. And then I got out, and then I was stationed at Pendleton. I had my mom had to move back to Ohio because my dad wasn't around. And then I would just hang out and still go up to Fountain Valley, see my friends. And then all of a sudden I meet this girl. She just rocks my world, and her name is Kymbry. And I start hanging out with her, and, I fall in love with her hard. She becomes my family, my rock. She goes to a Monday night Bible study at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, with Greg Laurie. And she goes there, and she recommits her life to Christ. She had grown up in the church, but when I met her, she was not walking with the Lord. Yeah. And she recommits her life to Christ and comes back to her house and says, hey, you can't stay at our house anymore, and we can't have sex anymore. I'm like, what are you talking about, man? Like, what do you mean?
Wait, what?
That's crazy. What do you mean we can't have sex anymore? Like, and so, but anyway, right at that time, that was like in July. In August, Iraq invaded Kuwait. And so, and then we sent troops over right away to protect Kuwait. And so, my unit is slotted to go. And for the first time in my life, I start reflecting on my own eternity. I start asking the question, okay, what happens when you die? And I started to read these self-help books, and I was, all this stuff. And then my brother Rob went to a funeral. He went to a funeral, and he felt like the pastor was talking right to him, and he gave his life to Christ. And so Harvest Crusade was happening. Harvest Crusade, Greg Laurie. It's like a Billy Graham crusade, but like West Coast hipper version, I guess. And they were doing their first one at the Pacific Amphitheater in Costa Mesa. And it was with Chuck Smith and Greg Laurie. They call it the Summer Harvest Crusade. And so that was happening. My brother Rob goes, hey, do you want to go to this? And where I'm at with the war, just, I'm going to go to combat. I'm like, yeah, I do want to go. And then Kymbry's like, oh, that's that same guy that, he's going to be teaching. I met him, I saw him at the Monday night Bible study. So I went to the Harvest Crusade, and it was 5 nights, Sunday through Thursday. And then they ended with a baptism at Pirates Cove or whatever it's called in Corona del Mar.
Yeah,
but
awesome.
I went on Sunday night, and then I wound up going every night. And every night I see people come forward to receive Christ. And I just would watching them. But every night I had an excuse. One night it was my pride and like, oh, this is stupid. Like, you don't need this. And the other night was my intellectual, oh, well, if God is real, then why is there this and that and all these intellectual questions. And then the third night was my fear. Like, oh my God, what's going to, what are people going to think? And I don't know. And then another night was my shame. Like, I'm not worthy of God's love, and I just, but they made my family or Kymbry and my brother and my sister-in-law would ask me, hey, do you want to go back? And every time I go, yeah, something was drawing me, something was calling me. And I remember that last was a Thursday night. I had gone every night. I've seen people come to Christ, and I've been fighting with God. And this last night, Greg Laurie does a call, says, hey, if you want to give your life to Christ, if you want peace, come forward. And then he said 2 things that night that really stuck with me. He says, if you want to have a relationship with God, he wants to have one with you. It's not about religion. It's about relationship. Come have one with him. And then he said something else. He goes, that baby in a manger, he grew up and he walked this earth, and he paid a debt that he didn't know. And he died for you. And it all came full circle, all the nights that night. And I just remember after like the second call, I just stood up. And I remember Kymbry looking at me and said, you want me to go with you? And I said, no, I need to do this on my own. And I just tapped out. I just surrendered, like all my pain, all my anger, all my frustration, all my excuses. And I stood up, and I remember just so vividly is like all the excuses that I had before that night. It was because I was so afraid that someone else was going to let me down. Could I try? I didn't trust anybody. The only thing I really trusted in my life was Kymbry. And I was so afraid that if this is God's just someone else that's going to let me down. Yeah. And so I just was battling. And then I just tapped out that night. I stood up, and I remember going in the aisle, was all backed up. And he said the sinner's prayer, and I said it, man. And I was saved hardcore, man. I said yes to Jesus. And I'll just today I get emotional every time I think about it. It just was such a pivotal moment in my life, from darkness to light. And I remember the next day, my friend asked me, like, I heard you gave your like some Jesus freak out or something. And I remember saying, I didn't even know what that was. And I said, man, I don't know what happened. I remember I decided to stop living for myself and start living for God. Yeah, and he goes, are you born again? I'm like, no, I don't know what that means. I don't know. But all I know is I stopped living for myself, and I started living for God. And I said yes to the Lord, and it transformed my life. And then so I went to the Gulf War, and I experienced, combat. I saw things that no human should see. Yeah. And it was difficult, and processing all that as a new believer, a new Christian, it was hard. There was a lot there, but I had God's assurance like I never had before, and that's something that when I said goodbye to Kymbry on the dock, when I left on ship, I went over there on ship in December. It was August. I wound up going there in December, and we got there. And I was there in January, and there for the assault and the ground war and everything that took place. And I also did graves and registration for my unit, which is you have to process the dead. And then I helped with prisoners of war Iraqis, then process their dead because they had no idea what to do with them. So anyway, it was horrible. But I had this assurance I never had before, and I came full circle when I came back from the Gulf War. And I was sitting there, and I was remembering the assurance I felt when I was saying goodbye to Kymbry, and here I was back going through all that, and that God had pulled me through. And then the adage that Job says, "The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." It's such a hard and difficult thing to process and understand. But I saw that firsthand. It's really sustained me. I don't have an existential crisis. I believe that God is God and I'm not, and I can't explain everything, but I know he's real, and I know he's transformed my life. And so that's what I experienced. And I know there's so many other military people like me that have experienced trauma, whether in combat or just from their childhood, or even just being in, you don't have to go to combat to experience trauma. And so, and a lot of them are just like me, and I want to help men and women fight through that trauma and process it, whether it's through PTSD or MTBI, or whether it's moral injury, doing something that you know is against what you believe. So anyway, and that's a long answer.
Oh no, it's a great answer. It's great, man. There's so many questions I feel like I want to ask you or hear about now.
Yeah,
so let me.
Ask anything.
I took a couple little notes here, and then I took a couple mental notes too. So maybe we can start with this. You said that because I know I relate to so much of those days that you went through of going. You said you kept coming back. There was the 5-day at Pirates Cove, I think, right? And its first day was pride. The second day was fear, somewhere in that order, right? And I know there's so many dudes out there who deal with that. And then also, as a dude, we want to fix everything and we want answers. We want to know. I want to know this. I want to know how. Well, that's impossible. That can't be true. That doesn't work. Go down all those things, and at some point, it's like the more that I try to figure it out and the more that I try to make sense of it all, the worse it gets. And the more pressure it feels, and the more freedom I lose, I think. And so at some point we have to throw our hands up and say, I don't know. It's like my 3 favorite words. I don't really know. I don't know.
Right.
But what I do know is, like you said, that God is real. He's done works in my own life. You've seen firsthand in your own life. What would you say to another dude out there, or anybody at that? But I guess I'm just speaking for the guys right now, like that maybe is from a tough background, or maybe they're just struggling, period. Like, what do you say to a guy who's trying to get all the answers, man, but just really the ultimate answer is just to surrender?
Yeah. I think it's like, we can try all, the world, we're all born with this God-shaped hole in our heart. It's meant for a relationship. The meaning of life is a relationship with God. And I think we spend so much of our whole lives, and guys who battle with addiction and just in life in general, we're trying to fill that hole with everything the world has to offer, but it never satisfies. Nothing satisfies that thirst, that desire. And man, we will believe man things, earthly things, the universe, all these other things, we'll do crystals, and we'll do all these things all these substitutes are earthly things that to try to fill that spot or feel that connection. When God had a plan, and the living God of the universe who created you said, the God of Jacob and Isaac and Abraham, and he wants to have a relationship with you, and he sent his son as that final sacrifice. And Jesus came and spoke and says, you don't believe my words, but you believe the words of your ancestors. It's like, it's easy for us, I think, to believe in more tangible things. And I think we want to just answer it. And I think like the self-help stuff is, I got myself into the mess. I need to get myself out of it. And I don't believe that, after all of that experience, it's like, having a relationship with God, people say, oh, it's just a crutch. Instead of shooting up drugs, you just shoot, instead of dealing with it, you're just, you're just shooting up God. You're just, God's just a crutch. And I'm like, God's not a crutch, man. Yeah. He's a life support system. And I don't even know how you go through without it. I just think, how do you explain all this random crazy stuff? It's like, God can take, if he can use me, like I'm a knucklehead, man. And he can use the Munck family and all that we've been through and taken our worsts and dust us off and give us on the job training and use us for his purpose. It's crazy. It's crazy that he can take that. So I would say, man, you're going to spend, if you're that guy who's doubting everything and you can go try the way of the world, feel that, try it out. You're just going to be disappointed. It's never going to satisfy that thirst. The perfect matching piece is a relationship with God. And that's my truth. And that is the truth.
Yeah, amen. So, amen. I 100% agree. And I've talked to so many different people and have friends who literally had it from a worldly perspective, or have it all: the cars, the house, the money, the women, everything. And every single one of them told me the same thing, that it didn't matter. Nothing fulfilled. They were constant, the drugs, the alcohol, there was constantly a hole there. And finally, a relationship with God was the only thing that actually finally satisfied that and made them find some peace in life. And so I think that leads me into this next question for you. I hear this a lot, in particularly in a recovery community. You're going to go to a 12-step program, or you're going to go to a men's group or whatever. Oh, well, there's God involved. Well, hey, that's cool for you, but I don't do religion. Okay, bro. Like, I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about a relationship with God. So I just wanted to hear your take on the difference between religion and a relationship with God.
Yeah. So funny. Like, I'm just such, I'm not a church guy. I didn't grow up in the church. I still think in cuss words, growing up.
Oh, thank you. I don't mean to interrupt, but I feel so much better about right now, because it's one of my struggles too. I'm just like, gosh, okay.
If you're listening, don't judge me. Hey man, I'm just trying to be honest as possible. Like, I grew up like in a crappy situation. Every adjective, verb was a cuss word. Then I joined the Marine Corps, right? Every verb, adjective, noun, at whatever.
Yeah.
All the grammar starts with the ends of the cuss word.
Yep.
Right. So, what was the question? I'm sorry.
We're just talking about the difference between religion and a relationship with God.
Yeah. And so I'm that guy that my friends see me now. Like, I see friends I haven't seen since, are people I know from high school. And they're like, Greg, you're a pastor? Really? No way. Like, I'm that guy. I'm not that guy that was, I was a fun guy, but I got in a lot of fights and different things in high school. And it was usually because I didn't start them. It was because my friends, big mouths, And so, anyway, so growing up in that, I don't have this religiosity, I don't. Yeah. So I'm not a big religion guy, I am in the fact that, stepping back for the Christians listening, like I love God's word and his theology. And I understand what it means to be the church and true religion and that. But I'm just talking for this question. It's like, no, I don't. I'm all about authenticity and realness. It's not about religion. It's not about legalism. It's not about do's and don'ts. There's a part of that. There's a part of being holy. And as we walking with the Lord, we take steps forward. Maybe it's 2 steps forward and we take a step back. And then that's okay. God's word is for that grace. And that's what I am attracted. I'm not attracted to religion. I'm attracted to God's grace and his sovereignty, and that he's the God of the first chance, the second chance, and the 100th chance. And, even though we're doing 2 steps forward, 1 step back, it's still going forward. And I'm not about judging somebody, like, cause if the Sober Guy podcast, right? Like that, how it is in recovery. It's like, it could be your 20th time, How many promises have you made? Like my dad, how many times did I see him, before he changed his life? And I gotta talk about that for sure, about what happened to my dad.
Yeah.
But it's not about religion. It's about relationship, and God wants to have one with you. And that's why it's so important just to accept God's grace, because that's where that God loves you just the way you are. And sometimes it's hard to believe that, but you can't you can't clean all the mud and dirt off of you. You're not going to get yourself right and then be ready to have a relationship with God. God meets you at your worst. He died for you at your worst, not at your best. And so that's what's so awesome about God. Yeah. And he has made a way for us. And so it's not about religion. It's about a relationship. And for God, that is the meaning of life, relationship with God. Yeah. And it's through Jesus. It's Christianity, and so, I hope that helps a little.
It does. No, that's great. That's great. And I think it's a great kind of segue into coming back around, because one of the questions that I had regarding your dad is, I think that that we took a note of, even growing up, going through all that, hating him and now loving him. So I mean, I think that also ties into forgiveness. So how do we forgive? Yeah. How do we have compassion and find freedom in those things or those people that have hurt us, or those situations that we felt wronged in?
Yeah, man, that is such a powerful question. And, I've lived that, and I have an answer. I have an answer for that. I'm just telling you, I hated my dad with a passion. Like, he let me down so many times that he would promise not to do it again. So many times of yelling at him when there's guys shooting heroin in our house that don't speak English, and I'm kicking him out of the house, and he's like, chill out, man, it's cool. And I'm like sitting him in a chair, and he's crying, saying, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. I won't do it again. And all those stories, I hate it. He would apologize, and I would stick my hands down, he'd cut him off. He would do something, I would apologize, he'd cut him off. This hatred built up. So much so, one time I was in the Marine Corps, and then he was trying to get his life back together, and I got a phone call that he was drinking and driving again, and he went off an ice plant off Euclid Avenue here in Fountain Valley, and the hospital called me. He's in the hospital. I go down and visit him, and he's there in the hospital. They have a policeman there in case he tries to leave, because his drunk drivings were catching up with him. And so I remember walking in and spitting on him and walking out. That's how much hatred I had for him. I just wanted to tell him what a son of a, he was. And I left. I hated him. So long story short, one time my dad ultimately gets pulled over for drunk driving and drug possession, and he gets put in jail for 6 years. And so he gets sentenced, and he gets out of jail. My mom asked me to go pick him up, and I go call the other brothers. And he's like, no, can you just do it for me? My mom's in Ohio at this time. He got out early. He didn't have to spend all 6 years. Good behavior. He cut down like 2.5, 3 years. And so because of my mom asked me, I go down to El Cajon to pick him up in jail. And I go down there to pick him up, and we're driving back, and I'm telling him what happened to me in the Gulf War and all that's gone on, and how Christ has been in my life. And he said, oh yeah, I give my life to Christ in jail. And see, at that time, I didn't believe him. I didn't have you lack trust, even though I'm a new creation and I'm learning what it means to be a godly man. I'm still working out my kinks, right? And I don't trust this guy as far as I can throw him. So he says that, I'm like, okay, Dad, whatever, and then also one time during his addiction, when I was younger, I was like 13, he got saved, and we went to church for 30 days. And then 30 days later, he was back doing, drugs. And so for me, I was the guy who said, I was the one who used to say, oh, Christianity is just a crutch. Yeah. Instead of shooting heroin, you're shooting up God. I was like, I would make fun of Christians, and here full circle. So that's why we're in the car. My dad says he's a Christian. I'm like, yeah, okay, Dad, whatever. But sure enough, man, his whole life became about Christ. He got a job, at a hotel on the night shift. And I thought for sure he's going to go back to drugs, right? Oh, yeah. I had no trust. Yeah. But all of a sudden, 6 months in, he's sober. Wow. And he's in recovery. And then a year he's in recovery. Then he starts sponsoring guys. Then another year, he's sober and like he's speaking at different things. And then we start meeting after about a year and a half, 2 years, we start meeting for lunch or breakfast or whatever. And I'm just like, Dad, why did you say that to me? When you got pulled over here, and he would just weep and he would just cry and say, I'm so sorry, Greg. And why would you let me do drugs with you when I was 13? And why would you have someone at their house? And, why didn't you put me in your room during that? And he would just weep and just weep and ask for forgiveness. And so over like a year and a half, 2-year process of us meeting, we started to reconcile our relationship. And I remember the first camp I went to after I got back from the Gulf War, someone asked me to be that's my, how did I get into church? Yeah. Going back to your question, it's not about religion, it's about relationship. I get back from the Gulf War, and the guy who's counseling us, says, hey, Greg, marriage counseling, why don't you come up and be a counselor at camp? And I'm like, dude, there's no way. I'll cuss at the kids, man. I'm like, I was in the Marine Corps. You got the wrong guy. And he said this, he goes, it's only through the blood of Jesus that any of us are worthy. So come be a counselor up at camp. And so I went, and man, they stuck me with all these inner city kids from Compton and Maywood and Long Beach, throwing serious attitude, Hispanic guys, black guys, and I was there, and it was awesome because my story was their story. Yeah. We all had dads that had abandoned us somehow, some way. It didn't matter about our skin color or who we were. Addiction doesn't care about any of that stuff. It just destroys. And by the end of that year, at the end of that time, they were calling me, asking me to be their counselor again. And so at the end of that first camp, Dan goes, hey, will you give your testimony? And I said, sure. And I gave my testimony. But at my testimony, my dad's in jail. I'm like, guys, I just said to all these junior hires, I even cussed, I think, in my testimony. They didn't laugh. They weren't laughing at anything, man. Junior hires laugh at everything. Yeah. It was just all as serious as could be. And then I just said, hey, I need you to pray for me, because I hate my father and I don't know how to forgive him, but I know it's only through my relationship with God and that I could learn to forgive my dad. Yeah. And I said that there. Fast forward, I'm driving now in the car. I just picked him up from jail. We're driving back. And then that process I just shared with you starts. And slowly but surely, I came to love my dad. I came to forgive my dad for all the pain he caused me. And then we would speak together. It's called So You Want to See a Miracle. And we would start at different sides of the stage. And then he would say there once was a father, and I would say there once was a son. And then as the message goes on, we're getting closer and closer together. Wow. Because Jesus is the great reconciler of all. It is only through our relationship with Christ that I can forgive my father. Period. Man. Stop, full stop.
So good.
That's forgiveness.
Oh man, dude, I've done a lot of podcasts. This is one of my favorite ones. I got to tell you, man. Thank you so much, man. This is great.
Thanks, man.
I know we don't have too much time left. I want to be respectful of that. Let's talk a little bit about your book. I would love to hear a little bit more about it. Where can folks find it at? Give us a little synopsis and what they can look for in it.
Sure, man. Yeah, and just to tie off, it's called The Guide, because I told you Marine Corps boot camp, but also because Jesus became my guide. So the underlying theme as you read the book is not just I was a guide in boot camp, but that who's the guide of your life? What's guiding your life? Who's guiding your life? And I can tell you the only thing that makes any sense to me, and I have experienced everything, man. I've seen it all, the good and the bad humanity, and it's through God. It's through relationship with God. And so that's why I wrote the book. I actually wrote the book for my children. I have 5 kids. They're both I have 4 boys, 1 girl, 18 to 27, my oldest. And then my oldest is my kids are actors. My son, Noah, was Gibby on iCarly, famous show. And he was on the Goldbergs for 10 years. And so he's an actor, and my kids, they're all actors and performers. I'm just so blessed. Yeah. But, and then so I go through each of those phases that you and I talked about already. My survival stage, my warfighting stage, and then peacemaking. And you know what? That camp I was so afraid to be a counselor at and just said yes to. Later on, I became the director of that camp, years later. Wow. Then I started going to Bible college at night. And then I had a job after the Marine Corps selling semiconductors and did really well, managed 175 million in sales. But I always had this, I was involved in youth ministry and camps, and I had opportunity for someone to go on staff at a church full time. And I left an amazing job at 30 to go do ministry. And then we started Crossline Church back in 2005. And now 18 years ago, I'm the lead pastor. My buddy JP is the senior pastor. We have a church of about 1,400 come on a Sunday. And that's awesome. And God's just done an incredible work. And so the book is about that. The book is about what I've shared with you, really. All the stories I'm telling you and more are in here about when you allow God to guide your life, what he can do. I'm telling you what, man, if he can use me, he can use you. And that's the essence of the story. And I'm a blessed man. I live in total contentment. I don't have existential crises. I'm not saying that I know it's hard to explain when somebody loses someone they love or lose a child or they have cancer. How can God allow that to happen? And how could God allow my friend to die in my arms on the battlefield? How can God allow that my dad to do what he did to me? And the prayers I would pray to him, I didn't know who God was, but these pagan prayers asking God to help me. God answered all my prayers, not in the timing I would have liked, but he answered all my prayers. And I'm so blessed that I'm overwhelmed. And so I can live in that. And some people really hate that. They hate that when I say the word, God takes your worst and uses it for his best. Yeah. And then you just make that comment, they almost get offended because they've been living a life of pain and struggle. But you got to tap out, man. You got to surrender that pain. Yeah. God will take it all.
Yeah, it's good, man. Love it, man. Greg, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I'll put all the links today in the show notes. Let's see. It's gregmunck.net, right? And then ordertheguide.com.
Sorry, I got you how to get the book. Yeah. You can go to my website. It's gregmunck.net. Okay. And then also ordertheguide.com. There's links there to the ordertheguide.com. That might be easier, but my name, if you look up Greg Munck, you'll be able to find me. Yeah. So find the book. And I wasn't going to bring it up, but since you did, when I was doing a little pre-production before our podcast today, I did see that your son was Gibby. And so I have a 13-year-old daughter, and this is funny because she still watches iCarly. iCarly's 12 years old or something. And so I realized I kind of put two and two together, and I went upstairs and I asked her, I said, hey, Gibby? I said, yeah, I'm going to do a podcast with his dad. She's just freaking out. I was cracking up. Yeah. So dude, good stuff, man. My son Noah is an amazing man, and he's is he the 27-year-old? He's the oldest. He's my oldest. Yeah, okay, got it. And my youngest was on the show too. My youngest, he's 18. He's Guppy on the show. Oh, nice. Okay. And, but that's a whole nother discussion. Yeah. I got you. Yeah. But no, I'm just saying that it is. It's an amazing journey. It's crazy, and but he loves it. If you ever meet my son, call him Noah. Yeah, he loves that name more than Gibby. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure. That surrender, man. Once we do that, we don't know what God's going to do. So, thank you again. I appreciate you. We'll put all the links today in the show notes, and share the podcast with a friend, please. I would love it if you did that. You can connect with us on Instagram at That Sober Guy Podcast. Peace, love, and respect. Keep your blood clean.